So I want to talk to you about 6 tools for living with hope. The minute that comes out of my mouth, I think about how there are 53,786 tools and more for living with hope. I just want to talk with you about 6 that I shared about yesterday. We've been talking about hope in our gatherings on Sunday mornings because my wife and I were sitting on the couch one night, and she talked about sometimes having this feeling like there's nothing anchoring her. And it gripped me because I feel that same way. Like I have nothing that's keeping me steady. What I realize is that I don't have hope. Over the last several years, I realized my hope has deteriorated slowly in some cases, and in other ways, it's just dropped out. And I tie together hope and anchor because there's this verse in a letter in the Bible, the letter to the Hebrews. Like all the letters, it's somebody writing to people who are trying to follow Jesus, stick with Jesus in a time when it's really hard to do that. And this writer says that we have this hope that is a sure and steadfast anchor for our souls. And that person's talking about how Jesus is like this greatest of all time priest who's doing work in a place that we can't even see it to make things right on our behalf. And because of that, this writer says we have this hope that's a sure and steadfast anchor for our souls. We've been talking about that because I feel like I've lost that. And so the first week of our series called Anchor, Living with Hope in a Hard World, we talked about what is hope and what is it not. In our second week, we talked about like how do you build it or rediscover it? Like what are good building materials for an anchor? If anchor can be like hope, if an anchor can be like hope, then what do we build it with? And this last week, yesterday, we talked about how do you live with it? So I want to share with you 6 tools for living with hope, knowing that there are 53,786 and more tools. I'm not going to put this in a book or something. But first, let's recap really quick. What is hope? What is it not? Look, you can define hope in a lot of ways, but we talked about how it's this belief that things are going to work out, to put it really simply. Belief that things will work out for your good, for the good of those whom you love. And in a religious sense, in a Christian sense, it means that you believe that things are going to work out for all of creation for all time. You have this hopeful expectation. And what is good building material for hope? Like how do you put it together? There are a lot of things that can give us belief that things are going to work out. A lot of things that can give us confidence that things will work out or that things are moving in a positive or optimistic direction. We have a lot of sources of strength, a lot of gifts. We have relationships that give us that. For the people following Jesus, their steel for their anchor, however, was Jesus. Belief in who he is, what he could do, and what he would do. So that is kind of a building material for hope. But how do we live with it? Like, how do we use our hope? How do we keep investing in it and using it when we need it? I think of living with hope as investing in beliefs and behaviors that anchor us to something greater than ourselves. Beliefs and behaviors that anchor us to something greater than ourselves. So here are the 6 tools. The first 2 go together. Showing up and showing up with honesty. Showing up and showing up with honesty. Tools 1 and 2. Look, nothing can happen in terms of our hope if we're not showing up for it. But even more than that, hope requires that we show up with honesty. Doing that helps us to both kind of give us belief that can give us hope, but it helps us use hope when we need it. I'll give you an example. I try to start my days with stillness and silence. Sometimes I don't get there, but on Friday morning, this past Friday, I got up earlier than everybody else so I could have a chance to be in stillness and silence. And I was doing that for about 15 minutes. And I felt this, I was emptying my mind of thoughts and turning back to God when I got distracted. And I felt this grief and sadness in my system. And I just voiced that to God. I said, I'm sick and tired of not hearing your voice. I seek you. I genuinely hunger and thirst for righteousness. And I just feel like you're so distant. And the minute I said that, it's like a portal opened. And I sensed this presence that at a soul level that I feel like I've been missing for a long time. And then I heard a whisper that I thought might be God's voice. That's what happens to me. Is like I'll hear these the still small voices, they say, and I'll be like, was that God or was that me? And sometimes I'm pretty convinced, like, I don't think that was me. And here's what the voice said: Ross, you have a glimpse of the sadness I feel in my heart for the unrequited love I have for my people. I was like, whoa. And it was heavy. And it was like, unrequited. I don't use that word. I know what it means, but I don't use it. As somebody said yesterday, one of our sixth graders said this. I asked people, do you know what unrequited means? And the sixth grader said, it's when love is one-sided, when love is given but not returned. And for whatever reason, showing up and being honest in that prayer time, really honest with God, and hearing that back from God, in a way restored my belief, and a hopeful belief, that God is nearer than I realized, that God is grieving too, God is sorrowful too, and God is working in a way that I didn't think God was working. Show up, and show up with honesty, whatever that is for you. Your experience may be different than mine. In your meditation time, in your prayer time, first show up for it. Like, commit to it. Practice the discipline of it. But also do it with honesty. As I've said before, bring as much you as you can with you when you show up. In your prayer time, journaling, but when you show up in a Sunday gathering, when you show up with a group, be present, be vulnerable, be honest. Those are beliefs and behaviors that can anchor you to something greater than you. Here's tool 3: watch your investments. So if living with hope is investing in beliefs and behaviors that anchor you to something greater than you, then you got to watch your investments. You have to have space in your life to practice this thing that the saints have called self-examination. You're examining yourself. So in your journaling time, your prayer time with trusted friends and mentors, you have space to go, what am I investing in? Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What he's saying is, where you're already invested with your time, your passion, your money, your relationships, your body, where you're already invested, there your heart is also. So you gotta have space to ask, like, where am I invested? And is it anchoring me to something greater than me? Or am I invested in stuff that's just distracting me, numbing me, giving me escape? I don't know about you, but I have to do that regularly because it happens really quickly that my investments get out of sorts. I put my time in a place that's not anchoring me in something greater than me. I put my energy in something that's not anchoring me in something greater than me. And with this stuff, we're not looking for perfection. But you're looking for, again, showing up with honesty and watching your investments so that you're investing in beliefs and behaviors that anchor you to something greater than you. And again, with the spiritual disciplines, like the saints told us and tried to pass down to us, like their steel for their anchor, their cast steel for the anchor itself, and the forged steel for the chain was the relationship with Christ and their belief in the resurrection of Christ, that Christ is risen, victorious over evil and the forces of death, over all things, and that one day he will renew all things. They invested first and foremost in that. But for me, sometimes it's practical. Like, am I investing in being a present parent? That's anchoring me in something greater than me. Am I investing in being present in my marriage, anchoring me to something greater than me, right? Tool 4, endurance in community. Not just endurance by yourself, but endurance with community, endurance with others around you. I brought up that tool because I saw in some of the earliest followers of Jesus that they had this great transformation. For example, a guy by the name of Peter, he starts off as this people-pleasing, insecure teacher's pet, and then he becomes this guy who is, after Jesus leaves the earth, like really willing to stand his ground and put a stake in the ground about his beliefs about Jesus. And he did that until he lost his life for it. And I asked myself, like, how did he get there? How did a guy by the name of Paul get to the place where he was? It was with endurance. Endurance was a behavior that anchored them in something greater than themselves, specifically endurance with others. We see in the earliest followers, like they got together regularly to eat together, to pray together, to chip in for those who needed it, to listen to mentorship and teaching. They invested in each other, and it helped them to keep going when the going got tough. Endurance is not quitting. Sometimes endurance involves quitting in a bad direction. Like say you're going in a direction that really isn't the right direction for you. Sometimes you need to endure through a turn, endure through a curve. Endurance is also not, as you know, not getting knocked down, not getting knocked down. If we're trying to press on towards the things that are worth pressing toward, we will get knocked down. We will get knocked back. We will get ridiculed. We will face hardship from the outside and from the inside. Endurance is stepping up and taking one step forward toward a goal that is worth it. It's a worthy investment. It's a worthy pursuit. We need community for that. That's what church is for. That's what gathering on Sundays is for. That's what gathering in groups is for. That's what gathering one-on-one is for. That's also what your spiritual disciplines are for. Endurance in community with God. That's tool 4. Tool 5 is remembering grace. You could really put that tool 1. Grace is simply this bedrock Christian teaching that at the end of the day, God loved us first. God loves us when we're not interested in God. God is always pursuing us. The earliest followers of Jesus came to this epiphany like, how I got here is the grace shown to me in Jesus. And how I'll get there is the grace shown to me in Jesus. I got here by God. I'll get there by God. Like at the end of the day, it's up to God. God working in me and through me. There's a guy by the name of Paul who I think remembered that well. He kept like falling back on grace. He was a guy who was up to no good, persecuting the followers of Jesus, giving them the hardest time, standing by while one guy named Stephen got stoned to death, approving it. And Jesus interrupted his life. He had this vision of the risen Lord, and it interrupted his life like a good disruption. There are bad disruptions in this world. It's not as it should be. Paul got a good disruption, one that like he needed and he responded to. We've been asking in this series, whose responsibility is hope? Is it ours? Is it God? Is it others? Yes. It's a collaboration. Paul got this disruption, this graceful disruption, and he kept falling back on that. He kept realizing that for this guy who had been striving for everything, he was well educated, he had status, people like wanted to be like him. He gave it all up after he met Christ because like the things that Christ can gift me with in his grace are better than all the things I could strive for and earn. He kept remembering that, and it anchored him to something greater than himself. It gave him something to fall back on, but also something to step forward for. Here's tool 6. I said yesterday in our group meeting, I don't know what to call this thing. So you got to come up with a name for it. I just see in the earliest followers of Jesus and people I've been around who grow up in this belief that has hope in it, that they get to this point where They genuinely are willing to stand their ground. They're sharing their truth. So an example is in Acts chapter 2, there's a book called Acts of the Apostles. And this guy named Peter that I was telling you about, he was insecure, he was a teacher's pet, he was a people pleaser, and he follows Jesus for three years. There's his endurance and community. He keeps getting it wrong. He keeps guessing wrong. He keeps just wanting to get approval. This is his chance to be a hero. Keeps getting it wrong. By the time you get to Acts chapter 2, he's a transformed guy. And he's in the midst of people, the religious VIPs, for whose approval he probably yearned for in his wildest dreams. And now he's standing up to them, witnessing to what he's experienced to be true about Jesus, at potential risk to himself. And he does it. He even says, like, hey, fellow Israelites, hey, countrymen, you guys saw what Jesus said and did. And through what he said and did, you should have known, this is a paraphrase of Acts chapter 2, like you should have known who he was. Like you had proof based on what he said and what he did, like who this guy is. It was clear. And not only did you not believe that, you made him suffer. Not only did you do that, you crucified him. You helped to get him crucified. But guess what? He's risen. Because a guy like Jesus can't be kept down. He's too great. He's got too much of God's love in him. He's God's representative. He is God on this earth, and he is risen. He's able to stand up and do that. I don't know what you call that. But that tool is something that, like, I think that we're growing toward. I think we've all experienced in our lives people who are like reading from a religious script. It wasn't genuine. It was somebody else's script. No, that's not what I'm describing here. This was Peter's truth. And he wasn't willing to lay it down. He both like put down his anchor with people. It's like people were ridiculing him, getting ready to like give him some hardship, some of the same hardship they gave Jesus. He puts his anchor down. But he also kind of shows them his anchor, like, hey, do you see what this is made of? I'm not giving this up. Whatever that is, you can help me with that answer. It's tool 6. I know there are 53,786 tools for living with hope and more. These are just a few of them.